But how did this journey actually start for you? When did you start it?
My ambitions earlier on were actually to be an actor, which is why I moved to Toronto.
Oh, wow.
And as you can imagine, it's a very challenging field.
Can you explain to our audiences how can it actually make a difference?
Of course, when you're studying in school, getting the degree is important, or certificate, and getting good grades is important.
A requirement for them to have a job or have a better understanding of a culture that they are working in. How do you decide that?
People who are looking for jobs, but I also work with people who already have jobs and are actually working successfully, but they need to, they want to advance.
Hello and welcome to the Canadian Dream JUS podcast. As promised, I am here with another guest today, and I promise that today's guest is definitely going to help you a lot with so many things after you come to Canada. So today we have with us Mr. John Edward McGraw. He's founder Hijiku Coaching and Cross-Cultural Communication Coach. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Lila. Thank you for inviting me.
So the reason for inviting him is definitely clear. When you go to his LinkedIn, he's one of those people who are actually helping students and people and immigrants who come from different cultures and countries to settle in here in Canada in terms of jobs and in terms of how to adapt different cultures, especially while working in companies that are intercultural. So my first question for you would be you told me that you were born and raised in Canada, but you also told me that you went to Japan, and that's where you found that there is a need to establish this intercultural thing and to inculcate this confidence in people. But how did this journey actually start for you? When did you start it?
That's a great question. Well, the fact is that, as you mentioned, I was born and raised in Canada, and I didn't necessarily have plans to go to Japan when I went through university or anything like that. Actually, my ambitions earlier on were actually to be an actor, which is why I moved to Toronto.
Oh, wow.
And as you can imagine, it's a very challenging field, right? There's you have to deal with a lot of rejection, a lot of auditions, and I enjoyed acting, of course, but I, after a while, realized I didn't have enough of a passion to suffer for it. And I was doing all sorts of different day jobs. I worked in commercial sales. I worked as a bartender for a while. And ultimately, I felt that there was something, I wanted to do something else with my life. And then I heard about an opportunity to go and teach English in Japan. And this was... the requirements were relatively low at the time. You just needed a bachelor's degree, and it didn't matter what it was. I had that. And it was good to have the right passport, which I had a Canadian passport, which was beneficial, I have to admit. I had a lot of privilege just simply based on the fact that I was born in Canada as a result of this. And so I decided, okay, well, I'm going to give this a try. And I found it was a lot more challenging than I had expected. I just assumed, I can speak English. Of course, I can teach it. Right. But of course, there's a lot more involved with that. And eventually, I did get trained properly while I was in Japan on how to teach English. And well, one of the things that really got me interested being in Japan was that I actually learned more about Canadian culture and really what it was.
In Japan?
In Japan, yes, which sounds odd. But when you think about it, and frankly, probably this is something familiar to all of the viewers here, I would imagine, that when you are outside of your own culture, you understand your own culture better. And that's what happened to me as well in Japan. So I think that, although I didn't at the time have that idea, I think that's what ultimately led me to going into what I am doing now.
All right. So you were a teacher for a good 15 years, if I'm not wrong, and you must have had encounters with so many international students. So what was the major thing, according to you, they lacked?
Well, I think when it comes to international students, generally speaking, if we're talking about life here in Canada, I think it's just an understanding of if they're looking for for jobs, like how to do that, and also the ability to take full advantage of their time here.
Yeah.
I think what it comes down to is that there are many students, and this is quite natural, um, who feel, of course, when you're in a new environment, you don't know people here very well, things work differently. It's very natural to stay within your own community.
Yeah.
And to be honest, there's nothing wrong with that. Of
Yeah.
course, you can draw strength from being around people who have a shared background with you, shared values, shared cultural ideals. But if you limit yourself to just staying in there because it's comfortable,
Yeah.
you lose so much, so much of an opportunity. I've seen that not just with international students, but even when I was a teacher in Japan, seeing that with many of the English speakers there, kind of spending time with each other. So it's really taking full advantage, getting outside of your comfort zone, as they say, and connecting with people who are not necessarily part of your background, and seeing what you can learn from them and maybe what you can teach them as well. And I think that those are, in my opinion, two of the things that many students lack at times.
So about your like Hiyaku coaching that we talked about, you're founder of that. How did that start?
Yes, good question. Well, Hiyaku coaching, and I should explain that Hiyaku coaching, Hiyaku is Japanese for great leap forward or great progress. So, of course, I chose that because of my time in Japan, which was very influential to me. And what led me to do that was basically came at the tail end of my English teaching career. My wife, whom I met in Japan, as I mentioned earlier to you, her background is she's from Argentina,
Yeah.
but her parents were Japanese. We met in Japan, and she's an HR specialist. And when we came here to Canada, she was very heavily involved in working with newcomers, volunteering, being a part of a number of organizations like TRIAC, Immigrant Writers Association. And so I was connected not just with the international students that would come to the private language school that I worked at, but also the connections that she had.
Right.
And one of the things that I would hear from some of her colleagues once they found out that I was an English teacher, they would say, oh, okay, John, you're an English teacher, so can you help me get rid of my accent? Which, by the way, as you all probably know, is not possible. You're just replacing your accent with a different one. There's no such thing as getting rid of an accent, right? To make it clear, right? Just replacing it with a Southern Ontario accent or whatever else.
Yeah.
But that really struck me as kind of wrong somehow. Now, of course, clear pronunciation is important when you are speaking in another language, and there's some adjustment that's necessary. But it's one thing to work on your pronunciation, and it's another to try and replace your accent with a different one because you feel it might help you to fit in. And I can understand the desire for that, when you're unsure and you feel like you're out of place and you want to find your place here. But it got me thinking that, well, okay, maybe what are the benefits of that really? If you ultimately change your accent, is that still going to deal with all of the other issues that are in the way? Maybe other ways of communicating that are not necessarily related to language.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking because of my own experiences in Japan, the experiences that I'd seen, my wife go through first going to Japan and then also coming to Canada. And I reflected back on what I learned about Canadian culture when I was in Japan. And I thought, well, maybe there's this cultural way, how we consider authority, for example, being different ways. The ways we consider time or self-advocacy, right? Do you speak up in the workplace, or do you just listen to your manager and just do what you're told?
Yeah.
And a lot of that is influenced by our culture, the cultures that we were brought up in.
Yeah.
So I felt that a lot of those, if we address those, that can have just as much, if not more, impact than developing your language skills to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So that's what ultimately led me going into this field. And also at the same time, this happened around the pandemic that I was thinking this, and I happened to be laid off from my teaching job, which was a good impetus for me to pursue this because I had felt like I wanted to do something different. So the timing worked out very well, and so that's how I formed Hijiku Coaching and what I'm doing now.
All right. So it is actually really helpful. And that is very true about the fact that do you or do you not speak in front of your managers or people who are actually leading you? As someone who comes from India, I think we are told to always respect people who are older or elder than us in a way that you should never speak up even if they're wrong, and this is somewhat a part of culture, and I think that actually causes problem for us when we come to this country. I'm not sure about all the people from different religions and cultures and countries they come from, but this is definitely a problem in India. Even after coming to Canada, like I remember being a part of my first job, and I know the person was like from the South Asian community itself, but I couldn't speak up and it actually bothered me a lot. And we will talk more about these problems, and we will understand more about the coaching process that you provide. We've been talking about the intercultural coaching and also his own coaching, Hiyaku, and he told us like why he opened that and why he started it and what was the reason behind it. And I was also talking about the importance of speaking up when you were working under someone, even if they're sometimes more experienced, does not mean that you do not have a say. So I would now like to ask you how having intercultural coaching makes a difference in one's life when they join a new job or start with an opportunity that is not related to their own culture.
Okay, that is a great question. And I think what you brought up, that question about authority, is a great starting point because it is something that can be a challenge for, as you mentioned, people not just from India, but many cultures where there is that understanding of authority and
Yeah.
whether you're allowed to question or not. And understand, I want to make this clear to the audience that when I'm saying this, I'm not saying that the Canadian way is necessarily better or that even the way in India or different parts of India is worse or that one is better or worse. It's just that there are differences.
Yeah.
And when you're aware of those differences, then you can adjust as necessary. And I think that that's the ultimate value of understanding not only other cultures, but understanding your own culture. So
Yeah.
when you understand, okay, why is it that we do this? And as you mentioned, one of the things that can be a real challenge for those coming to Canada is that our view on authority is it's a bit more of it's a flatter hierarchy in the
Yeah.
sense that we're allowed to question and say that we disagree with a manager, and the general response from a good manager would be, well, okay, thank you, and I see your point, and they'll take it graciously, and so a good manager is also considered as that they show respect to their supervisors in a way of by listening to them and asking for their input, which again might be a bit different as well from some other cultures. So coming from one culture where you're told, okay, to show respect, which of course is a valuable thing,
Yeah.
but that you're not supposed to question a person can be a real hindrance because then this also connects with self-advocacy,
Yeah.
right? The idea that you're supposed to communicate to your supervisors what it is that you want to do, what is your career path.
Yeah.
So that means, sitting down, saying, hey, this is where I would like to go. What would I need to do to achieve that? Rather than letting your work speak for itself.
Yeah.
I know many newcomers who lost opportunities
Yeah.
to advance, to get promotions because they didn't have that conversation, because they assumed, oh, well, I will just work
Yeah.
and my supervisor will see it and they'll give me an opportunity. And they lost out simply
Yeah.
because they never had the conversation, because the supervisor just assumed, oh, they've never spoken up about it, so they must not be interested. They must be happy where they are.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. You have to show those soft skills. You have to show your willingness to communicate your opinions. That's what's expected in Canada. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, and there is I think that there is a desire to integrate workplaces more effectively so that we understand, okay, maybe not everyone is comfortable with that. Because I think that there's a lot of lost opportunities with so many people coming with valuable experiences, valuable international experiences,
Yeah.
and just having different ways of communicating. So I feel that that international and then cross-cultural understanding is not just expected on the newcomers, but it's
Yeah.
also should be for those of us who
We're
are born and
already.
raised here as well.
Yeah.
However, we only have control over what we do personally, so we can just do what we do for ourselves and take responsibility for our own selves and how we learn and how we adapt to different situations. So
Yeah. So I think this is, I've heard this so many times, like the best way to get something is to ask and to discuss. And I think most of the times we just assume that because we're doing something, so we will get noticed. But the thing is, there are so many people working in this one company, and it's not managers or founders' duty to give. I mean, they are responsible for somewhat the good environment and to give right people right promotions, but not all the time because there are so many things that people have to manage, right? Especially people who are in the position of authority. So it's our responsibility to always keep on passing the message and always letting them know that what we want to achieve and where we want to be at the end of the day, and this is our goal. And sometimes people ask, there have been so many times when I join some place and people ask me, "So what is your plan?" And I remember being blank about it. I only plan about the fact that, oh, I just want to get this job, and I do not but transfer this message that through this job, this is the place where I want to be. So thank you so much for sharing that insight. And other than that, what are some of the ways I would like to ask to get job here in Canada a little easier? Like, how do we get it without having all the hassle? Because we know there are so many platforms like Indeed and LinkedIn. You can type and text and send messages and tell them this is what you're interested in, and even maintain your LinkedIn profile. But sometimes still we're not able to skip that line. So, what are some of the ways, according to you, to get a job here somewhat relatively easily in Canada?
well, okay, relatively easily, I suppose, because I don't know that there's any necessarily easy way,
Yeah,
unless
yeah.
you've got a friend who's a CEO in a company and wants to do that. Maybe that's the easy way to do it. But
Yeah.
I would say, of course, as you mentioned, maintaining a LinkedIn profile and of course, applying for jobs is an important step. Obviously, if you do that just by itself, you're probably not going to get anything because, again, so much of what's important here is networking and
Yeah.
not so much. And I have a colleague even refer to it. It's not even who you know; it's who knows you, right?
Yes.
And what they know about you. So I would say that networking with people, if you're interested in working in a particular company, then see if you can have informational interviews with people from that company, and not necessarily just those who are making the hiring decisions, but those who would be in a position, who are in a position that you would like to be in. And the more people that know you, then when opportunities come up, the more that they're willing to advocate for you.
Yeah.
The other thing is that when you are applying for jobs, and this is a tip that I heard specifically from a recruiter who works in some major companies. He's working in Toyota Credit now. Actually, it's a major company as well.
Yeah.
That one way to really stand out is to reach out to them on LinkedIn, but to do it in a very specific way. The point is that after you apply, that you reach out to them and say, hey, I've gone through this application process. I've done this. Just wanted to let you know that I'm, personally, this is why I think I would be a good candidate. And here's my resume. Now, and he mentioned that for him, that was was a deciding factor on him choosing candidates. Now,
Yeah.
note that that's the important thing. It's not, hi, I'm looking for a job. Please tell me, here's my resume. Can you tell me about any positions? No, because then that shows that you have no initiative and you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
The point is that you are showing you have initiative. Hey, this is the position I've applied for. I've already gone through this. I've done my research. I've done my work. So Now I'm just reaching out to let you know about it. So it's that's the important part, is showing that you have the initiative and that you've done the work.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very important. That's a really amazing insight, because I remember being at this place where I know that I have connected with the person who is a part of, like, let's say CEO or maybe a manager or HR, but I never know what to say. I have done this where I have said, "Hi, I have applied for this job and I hope to get back some reward from you," and like some very vague like text to them, which I know wouldn't make any difference. And this is actually very helpful that you tell them that why they can, like, why they should pick you out of all the applicants or all the applications that they're receiving. Thank you so much for mentioning this, because, and also talking about networking as a very essential part of skipping the line of 1,000 applications. And we will talk more about it and understand how and why networking can change the game for you. We have discussed so many things about the job opportunities, how to skip the line, how maintaining your LinkedIn profile can actually make a difference, and also sending a personalized text message to an HR can make a difference, and so many things about how do you can actually stand out when you apply for a job. And we were also talking about networking, and I would like to ask some more questions about networking. When I remember when I came to Canada 3 years ago, I had no idea what networking was, because there's no concept of networking in my country and some other South Asian countries that I know of. And some of my friends, sometimes still, when I tell them that, oh, you should do networking, they're like, what is that? And then I tell them that, there's an app called Eventbrite. You can go and you can find some good networking events. They're always happening. And even, I remember I have studied in two different colleges here. First, I was in Seneca, and then I was in Centennial. And they would send us emails telling that there's a networking event today at a college and you should attend. And this is going to be the process, and these are going to be the companies. And I would think, what's going to happen? And first thing that would come to my mind was, am I confident enough to walk in there and talk to people who are actually HRs and, the managing directors of the companies? So it never really bothered me to actually give it a proper look and how it can make a difference for me. So can you explain to our audiences that, like, how can it actually make a difference?
Well, the thing is that, and this goes back to what we was talking about earlier regarding the things that many international students miss,
Yeah.
which is one of them being taking full advantage of the opportunities you have while you're here.
Yeah.
Of course, when you're studying in school, getting the degree is important, or certificate, and getting good grades is important. But in reality, eventually, in the real working world, your grades don't matter that much.
Yeah.
It's really about the relationships that you've built. And Canada's workplace really revolves around relationships. Of course, you have to have the requirements to fill certain positions, but knowing when people know who you are. The thing about Canadian culture, generally speaking, a bit risk averse, right? I've heard from many colleagues from India talking about how the banking system is a little behind, for example, in the tech side of things.
Yeah.
And I think it's partly because we want to be comfortable with who it is that we're working with. And when you're not known, then there are more questions. Okay, is this person going to be a good fit in our company? Will this person, okay, yes, they have these qualifications, but how are they as a person? How will they fit on a team? Could they be a good manager? So when you get people to know you, then that helps to answer those questions. And when you start doing it as a student, before you're actually looking for a job, that makes a huge difference. You can think of it even as an opportunity of, like, exercising. If you compare it to trying to get fit for a sporting event, like going into the Olympics, for example, right? I'm no athlete myself, but I'm going to go with that analogy anyways. Can you just go and join the 100-meter dash in the Olympics without any kind of training? Of course not, right? That takes a lot of practice. You have to do all sorts of training, and it's not just running every day. It's also doing all of the stretches that are necessary, making sure you have the right nutrition.
Hmm.
And you can think of starting networking while you're in college or university as getting ready for the real world, when you have to network with people, have good relationships with the people you're working with, when you're looking for jobs. So when people know who you are a couple years before you're actually looking for a job and you start to build those relationships, that is a huge advantage, right? And you mentioned earlier, okay, do I have the confidence to go
Yeah.
talk? And I think this can come from being young, as you said, thinking, well, I'm just a student. What kind of experience do I have? What could I
Yeah.
offer to someone? Think about it. You have come from another part of the world, taken that step. That's a very significant step for anyone to take, to go to another, go leave your homeland, leave your home country, to find opportunities elsewhere.
Yeah.
There's a story there. Everyone who's gone through that has a story. You know, think about, okay, what is it that I want to achieve? What is it that I want to do? What is your story?
Yeah.
You know, what field, if you want to be in, who knows, if you want to be in IT, or if you want to be an HR consultant, or whatever, think about, okay, well, why is it that I want to do those things?
Yeah.
That can be a very compelling story that you can tell and you can share with others.
Yeah.
And also, it's not necessarily so much about having the right answers, about talking about, oh, well, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I can do for you. It's also about asking the right questions. Do a little bit of homework. When you know you're going to a networking event and you're interested in talking with certain people, do some homework about them.
Yeah.
And, you know, seek out those people. Hey, you know, I see that you're in this field, that you've gotten this position. How did you get into that?
Yeah.
And show interest in them by asking them questions to learn more about them and learn more about the field. You know, not just generic like, hey, what do you do? I have no idea, but asking questions in a way to show that you've actually done a little bit of homework.
Yeah.
That can make a very big difference, and people will remember you, and you can learn from these people.
Yeah.
And it makes it easier because you're asking questions and letting them do the talking instead of having to do all of the talking yourself, trying to convince them that you're this amazing person.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think doing the homework and asking the right questions saves a lot of time, and also it saves you from the exhaustion of attending networking events, because sometimes it gets a lot. There are a lot of people that you want to talk to. There are a lot of questions that come to mind, but the structured questions, I think, can make a lot of difference. And I would also like to talk about this question that really comes to my mind sometimes, and I think a lot of my friends would agree to this. And I think I also discussed this before this podcast, that so there are a lot of immigrants, not just from our country, but so many other countries that are coming to Canada, and it is believed, and I have heard from my like my Canadian friends, that you guys are taking your jobs. And sometimes I feel that, are we taking the jobs, or we're actually working harder than the people, or we're actually just trying to grab all the opportunities here that are here? And because I think this also comes from the culture that we are from, we're naturally generally very hardworking, and it doesn't sit well with us when we are sitting idle and just doing nothing. And not that this is what Canadians do, but I think we are always pushed to do a little extra. But is that true that immigrants have actually taken over the jobs that were safe for Canadians?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. You know, and of course, because of what's been going on in the news right now, and with the concerns about international students, then that's obviously a pretty relevant one. And I would say, generally speaking, I think, of course, you're always going to find people who have that sort of attitude. Oh, immigrants are taking our jobs. This is something that's been repeated through history, through countries everywhere, right? Immigrants are taking our jobs because immigrants are an easy target, right? In many times, they often don't necessarily have a lot of power in the society that they're in, and usually they don't until they become citizens. They don't have the right to vote. So for certain politicians to take advantage of that, it's a very easy target, right?
Yeah.
To go through that. Oh, well, okay, the reasons that things aren't good, it's because, you know, and depending on the country, they might be more blatant about it or might be a little more veiled, but it's an easy, that's a thing throughout history,
Yeah.
right? And I feel in Canada, because of what's been going on recently, that's starting to come a little more talked about a bit more. Whereas I would say, compared to a lot of countries in the world, I would say Canada's been quite welcoming, the average
That's true.
person has been. And I still think that's true, but there's a bit of concern because of partly what's happened, because there have been certain people who decided to take advantage, not just of Canadians, but also of immigrants,
Oh,
to sell them, hey, this is an easy way to get a job in Canada, right? By going through the
yeah.
international and kind of taking advantage of that. Um, so I, to make it short, I don't think that I that immigrants are taking all of the jobs, right? I think it's a matter of, yes, opportunities to work hard, and take advantage of that, but it's easy to sometimes, if things aren't going well in your life, to
Blame.
find something else to blame.
Yeah, all right. Okay. We've been talking about networking and how, it's important to groom yourself when you come to Canada and understand the cultural difference. And, it's important to talk and speak up and go to networking events and do not feel that you're less than anybody. As you mentioned, that you're coming from a faraway country. That's already a huge step. It's just a smaller, like small and little steps that makes a difference. And as we were talking about this coaching experience, right? And how does it make a difference, and what your coaching sessions look like how do you assess a person that this is what they need and this is going to be the requirement for them to have a job or have a better understanding of a culture that they are working in? How do you decide that?
Okay, that's a great question. So I guess we can talk about my one-to-one sessions and what's offered there. And
Yeah.
I work with people who are looking for jobs, but I also work with people who already have jobs and are actually working quite successfully, but they need to they want to advance
Yeah.
and achieve more. So what happens usually with the first session is I ask them to take a couple of assessments. One I use, which is the Intercultural Development Inventory, which
Okay.
measures your cross-cultural competency. How comfortable are you with working across cultures and seeing where you actually are? And because that opens up a lot of opportunity. We often think that we're better at many things than we actually are. So
Yeah.
and that also applies to how effective we are at communicating and working across cultures. So this assessment brings that out, and it opens up an opportunity for conversations, because it's a starting point, and then it gives something that's a little more measurable, because
Yeah.
it's hard to, well, okay, how do you measure cross-cultural competency? Well, this is one way to do it. I also use another assessment called the Cultural Orientations Framework, which measures things not so much on a scale, but more about your preferences and your abilities. Like how we talked about authority. Do you see authority as something like, okay, this is something you see a lot of distance in power and you treat people with respect and maybe don't speak up to them? Or is it more of a flatter, more equal hierarchy? How do you see time? Those different things.
Yeah.
So then it helps to quantify your own viewpoints, your beliefs, your values. And with that, then we can use that to discuss, okay, is it that you're looking for a work here in Canada? Okay, so what could be barriers there? What could be strong points? What could help you?
Yeah.
But also what could be getting in the way? So, for example, if your cultural competency is more on the lower side, where you have difficulty seeing cultural differences, or you do see them, but it's a defensive reaction. Oh, this is strange. I don't like this, kind of things.
Yeah.
Then that can be a problem if you're trying to get into a place, especially workplaces in Canada, where you're going to be working with people probably from many different backgrounds and cultures.
Yeah.
So that gives that. Then we take that information and we use that to start to think about, okay, so what are the steps that you need to take if you want to be able to manage, be a better manager? Okay, what are the gaps between how what you want to do and what's seen here, for example, as being a good manager. Maybe if you're
Yeah.
if in a Canadian workplace, what's a good manager seen
Hmm.
as?
Hmm.
We take that as an example. Okay,
Hmm.
and what are you comfortable with? And it's also figuring out how to do it in
Hmm.
an authentic way,
Hmm.
because the thing that we don't want to do is say, okay, well, I have to be more outgoing. I have to be advocating for myself.
Hmm.
And when you start doing that, it feels fake
Yeah.
because it doesn't feel natural to you,
Hmm.
because then you're not being natural to yourself. But there's always some, when there are gaps, there's always some space for room. Like maybe I
Hmm.
can adjust a little bit. Okay, so maybe I can't go directly up to a person
Hmm.
and start up a conversation with them so easily in networking,
Hmm.
but maybe I can ask questions.
Hmm.
Maybe that's an easier way to start with. So it's
Hmm.
kind of figuring out that space there.
Hmm.
And then ultimately, the third step is, okay, once we've figured out these steps, then
Hmm.
let's implement them,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
And getting feedback, talking about how's it going, checking in with those
Hmm.
kinds of things, and figuring out what counts as success for you
Hmm.
in that case. So that's basically what the coaching sessions look like, and they start with those assessments I
Okay.
mentioned.
Okay. So it's just not one coaching session. There are several coaching sessions that you follow along.
Yeah, generally
Hmm.
what I offer is a three-step process for
Hmm.
that, usually three
Hmm.
three sessions,
Hmm.
because coaching, it's, of course, you can get some value from having a simple one single consultation, and I do
Hmm.
offer a discovery call, which
Hmm.
can be quite valuable even in 30 minutes.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
to affect real change over long term, it's good to have that process, because you have to do a lot of the work
Hmm. Hmm.
yourself,
Hmm.
right? and
Understandable.
and that's where there's a bit of accountability, because it's
Hmm.
very easy to, we get information
Hmm.
and then, oh, that sounds great, and then we forget about it. But
Hmm.
then you have that accountability, you do it over time.
Hmm.
That's when you achieve real success.
Right. I read it in your LinkedIn bio where you mentioned that sometimes we're afraid of becoming too Canadian that we're like too afraid of becoming too Canadian that we'll forget our own identity. So you also help to stay like authentic while also like taking over in this like taking over getting okay with the fact that you're entering a Canadian culture or any other culture. So do you also help with that, like staying authentic with who you are, but also accepting the culture while not losing your own identity?
Absolutely. That's
Hmm.
extremely important, is finding
Hmm.
that balance between the two. So
Yeah.
just doing what you can do, having the conversation, what feels
Hmm.
authentic,
Hmm.
and what is it, considering your own values. What are
Hmm.
things that maybe you don't want to adapt to because it
Hmm.
violates your values? But
Hmm.
understanding what your own values actually are is an
Hmm.
important part of that step to
Right.
reach that authenticity.
Yes. Actually, I sometimes think that people who were born and raised here must have had like slightly less difficulties than people who come from other countries. But as you mentioned that you were also navigating your life, like quite often, like when you wanted to be an actor, then you decided that oh you don't really have that amount of passion maybe to go through the pain of becoming and reaching where you want to be, and then you became a teacher, then you went to some different country entirely. And sometimes people don't do that, especially I think in Western cultures. People like to stay in the like especially people from USA and Canada. Maybe Canadians might go to USA, and US people from US might come to Canada for like studies and stuff, but you went all the way to Japan. It was like a huge and a big step, I think. So why am I saying and repeating your journey in front of you is that I quite often, like every time when the podcast take place, I ask this question, like if you had to give an advice to your younger self, which was just still navigating and started in their own like journey and like in terms of profession, what would that advice to yourself would be to your younger version?
That is a great question. I
Mm-hmm.
would say really just really fully explore what it is that you want to do,
Mm-hmm.
and not necessarily what you think you should do or what you expect others should be telling you to do. Uh, I think that if I done, because I think part of my lack of direction when I was younger was because I was still kind of figuring it out, and sometimes focused on what I thought I should be doing as opposed to what I really wanted to do. So that would be, I think that would be my advice, is really Listen to yourself and really take that time to really explore deeply. What is it that I really want to do? And not what others or what I think others want me to do.
Yeah. And last piece of advice for newcomers who are coming from different parts of the world, like what would your 1 minute quick advice for them?
Okay. Take comfort in your community, but don't get stuck there. Connect with others. Find opportunities in other communities as well. Building the network. The more people who know you, the more opportunities you have, not just professionally, but to grow as a person and to really thrive here.
Thank you so much for your valuable feedback. And I actually really enjoyed this podcast myself because I learned a lot. And I'm pretty sure that people who will be watching this later on will learn so many things from this. And I think we should have a series. It's like one time inviting you just one time is not enough. Like 40-minute session or 1 hour session is not enough. And I think we should start the personalized JUS coaching session for the people who are
That
watching
sounds great
us.
to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
We'd love to have you over and over again. And I think this will really help people groom themselves and understand the importance of networking and so many things that we talked about in this session. Thank you so much for joining us today and giving us this opportunity to talk about your experience and sharing how we can become better as immigrants or international students when we come to Canada.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Mahima. It's been a great pleasure to be here on Just TV.
Thank you, and thanks to all the viewers for watching. We'll be back the same show, the Canadian Dream Just podcast, same timing. See you next time with another guest. Thank you for watching.